Good morning, everybody. My name's Danny Pecorelli and I'm privileged to be chairman of the Master Inn Holders. So today we have another one in our series, Leading Through the Revival. Before we get started today, I've got two dates for your diary. The first day is with Dr. Hilary Cooke on July the 2nd at 11 o'clock. And we're doing a session called Picking Up the Pieces. Hilary's done a really practical guide to managing through these really challenging times. I've seen the content and it's really good for your senior managers to help them cope with all of this change and uncertainty. The second date for your diary is Wednesday the 15th of July at 11 a.m. And that's a session about brand strategy and challenging and re-looking at your brand once again with some great speakers, Mark Rada and Robbie Barr, who many of you know. During the session, there is a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. The vast majority of this session is going to be open to questions and answers. We've already had quite a few through. The questions will be moderated. We will try and get through as many questions as we possibly can for you all. So it's a real privilege to have Kate here. Last time I said she needed no introduction. I was trying to think of a suitable descriptor or adjective for Kate. So I'm going to also ask on question and answers for people to put through suggestions of what we should call Kate, but I'm going to call her the doyenne of the hospitality industry. Kate, over to you.
Thank you very much, Danny, and thank you very much for having me back. And also thank you for accommodating the change of date at the last minute so that we could all check out and see what was happening yesterday when the Prime Minister gave us the news that we'd all been waiting for so long, that we could restart, we could reopen, we could take bookings with confidence from the 4th of July. It's slightly disconcerting to have Danny's wonderful pool showing up because that is the one bit that we can't use from the 4th of July, but hopefully we'll be able to reopen those bits as soon as we can as well. So thank you for that. I was just going to propose that I ran through very quickly the key points from yesterday's announcement and the key elements that are coming out from the guidance which was published overnight for you to be aware of, and then leave most of the time available for questions and answers, because I'm sure we're all feeling our way into this and working it through. So the first thing is all indoor hospitality and outdoor hospitality is open from the 4th of July. There are very few elements that are remaining closed. The main ones being those that the government describes as crowded by design, or where you've got large numbers of people who are not in the same family group coming together, and there are particular challenges about frequent touch surfaces, or where there are particular challenges of close contact or intimate contact between guests and staff, or where there are higher risks because of sweat, because of sporting activities, or there's loud music and therefore there's particular problems with singing. So those are the sort of broad areas where there are challenges. If it's indoor and you've got loud music, people are singing, or they're carrying out sporting activities, there is a higher degree, a higher likelihood of infection, and so those are put on the back burner and won't be able to open in this first wave of hospitality. So just as we've had waves of the economy reopening, we will see waves of hospitality reopening. And I think it's great that as of yesterday, we had confirmation that the bulk of hospitality will be opening from the 4th of July. The second point is that for our hotel businesses, most of the facilities will also be able to open from the 4th of July. The core accommodation, restaurants and bars, all of them open. There are limitations, however, as I say, in terms of leisure facilities, spas, beauty facilities. You are able to open your hairdressing within it, but you're not able to have nail bars, massage, all of those spa treatments. They will come later. When it comes to looking at the way in which we reopen, the government guidance has been published. It is very risk assessment based. It is looking primarily at the control measures you need to put in place to protect your teams, and then flowing through from that, look at what you need to do to protect your customers. And there are two core pieces of guidance for the hotel sector. One is looking at accommodation. The other is looking particularly at the bars and restaurants within the premises. So you do have to cross-reference a little bit. And then there's an overarching set of guidance on the visitor economy, which looks at tourist facilities, tourist attractions, etc., but also puts the accommodation and the food and beverage within the context of that. It does set out within that guidance a menu of options for people to take account of. They are phrased as things you should have consideration for, or things you might want to take into account when you are carrying out your risk assessment. So it is individual to the premises, it's individual to the type and style of the outlet that you operate. And I think there's a key element there about business being free to make sure that they take the steps they think are necessary to act as a responsible employer and a responsible operator to keep their guests safe and to facilitate responsible socializing. It's a common sense approach. We are moving away now from it being enforced and mandated social distancing. We are now moving towards a guidance-based approach that has some challenges in terms of providing less clarity and less certainty. It inevitably leads to a degree of vagueness. But as I say, because it is less black and white, it provides that great flexibility for you to adapt it as you see fit to keep your guests and your team safe. And the underlying principle that the Prime Minister stressed yesterday a lot was a common sense approach to understanding and applying the change in the social distancing from 2 meters to 1 meter plus. So 1 meter is allowed both in the workplace, in back of house, in kitchens. Ideally, they still say take 2 meters. If you can't do 2 meters, then you may go down to 1 meter with additional mitigations. And those mitigations are principally around hygiene, sanitation, enhanced cleaning facilities, ventilation, and only if necessary and only if you feel it's appropriate for your guests and your teams, do you then need to look at physical barriers or PPE in terms of masks. So if we look at the guidance itself, it has just been published this morning. We are working to get our official guidance, the UKHospitality protocols. They are going to be endorsed by government. So there are a few tweaks that we need to make this morning in order to make sure that they fit the guidance that was changed overnight. And then that will be up and available to everybody later today. It will be freely available whether you're a member or not. If you are a member now, you will be able to access our guidance and our protocols now, and you should have had access to that over the last 4 weeks as government thinking has evolved. So hopefully you will be well prepared. But the main points that have come out in the overarching guidance for hotels to be aware of, all private rooms with ensuite facilities can reopen. If there are shared facilities, then they need to be ideally designated to one room. Shared toilet facilities throughout the hotel can reopen. There are enhanced cleaning rotas to facilitate that, but all shared facilities, all communal areas in the hotel are now able to be open. Previously, those were all closed. There's an encouragement for guests to wear masks in communal corridors. There's an encouragement for people to look at the minimizing the contact points between guest and staff when they're touching stuff. So ideally for room service, left on a butler's trolley outside the door. Same with luggage delivery, that you minimize the contact that you've got when you're picking up luggage, so that you encourage the guest to put it on any trolley. And then again, you leave it outside the door. You don't take it into the room as you would normally, just minimizing that potential cross-contamination of staff going into guest rooms and vice versa. Clearly, the move to a 1 meter plus social distance eases the challenges that we had at reception and reception desks, but you also are needing to manage the flow throughout the premises, managing lifts to make sure that there is a manageable social distance there. The other key thing in terms of guests is your additional guest facilities are not yet going to be open. So gyms, pools, both indoor and outdoor, and spas, not able to reopen yet. We are working actively and at pace with government to see if we can get that date for their reopening brought forward to the middle of July, certainly to coincide with the summer holidays, or to ensure that we can get outdoor facilities open more quickly than indoor. The challenge there is not to do with the pool itself, or necessarily even the gym itself. It is the communal changing facilities and communal showers that the Chief Medical Officer does not feel able to sign off as being able to be reopened fully. So we are hopeful that that can be addressed within the next couple of weeks. The other areas that you're not allowed to reopen, for any of you who do have it, indoor play areas for children need to remain closed, and also indoor entertainment. It's fine to have seated entertainment if it's broadcast, if it's TV broadcasts, not any live entertainment, singing, music, etc. We have checked and we're seeking clarification whether that music ban is really directed at pubs, bars and restaurants where you might have nightclubs and dancing. Clearly any nightclubs and dancing in a hotel also not allowed, but we're checking to make sure that we can still have piano bars, piano lounges, musicians playing in tea service or dinner service. What you're not allowed to do is have singing. So we're checking about the live performances of music for you. In terms of groups coming together, particularly in restaurants and the bar areas, you are only supposed to be having groups that are coming together within the current social distancing requirements. So you need to make sure that those are 2 households or groups where they might be coming together as a socially mixed group. And then your social distancing restrictions are to put space between those groups, not within that group. The other area that you're not going to be able to reopen yet, business events, conferences, exhibitions, not allowed. There is a reduction and the restrictions on weddings. Weddings of more than 30 people, of now up to 30 people, are now allowed, but we're seeking clarification whether that means that also hotels can not just host the ceremony, but could also accommodate the reception. We believe that that is okay up to 30 in that private event, but there is an absolute ban under legislation of groups of more than 30 people. So I think that that is an indication, if you are opening up any meeting space, that's the size that you would be looking at. When it comes to restaurants and bars, the desire from the government is that there is table service only. If you can't do table service, but you are going up to the bar or a counter to be able to order for any coffee shops within the premises, then you should be making sure that people are not congregating at the bar or the counter when they've placed their order, are walking back and are consuming at seat. So it's not an absolute ban on placing an order at a bar area, but ideally they would prefer table service, easier to manage in your facilities, that I would imagine. Minimizing self-service, encouraging people to remain at table, contactless payments where possible, encouraging people to, if they're using tips, particularly for bellhops, doormen, or bar and restaurant staff, that's added to the bill, so we minimize the amount of cash that's passing between people, and minimizing the contact in those common touch point areas. So those are the main areas that have been outlined that are causing sort of potential concerns, or areas where we might need to adjust service to accommodate it, and will clearly impact upon the full facility and the full leisure service that you are able to provide in a large number of your hotels. I should say that the guidance that's been issued is a live document. They are looking to supplement it. There will be questions and answers that come out from the government as well, where people have uncertain interpretations or want further clarification. So I'd really welcome any feedback that people have when they've had a chance to digest it, work their way through it, or have any uncertainties. We can make sure that we capture that and deal with it. The final element that came up yesterday in the announcement, which was portrayed by the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary as a sort of quid pro quo, excuse me, for getting hospitality reopen, was a desire to make sure we could capture guest data as much as possible. Clearly very easy to do when we are looking at hotels and residents. You will have that, and the only requirement there will be about keeping the data that you've got and making it available on request by a Director of Public Health if there is a local outbreak, and it is purely if there are local outbreaks that data will come into play. You are only going to be required to have the lead booker's contact details, so it's one contact per party. The challenge then comes to a larger extent when you are reopening restaurants and bars to non-residents. the encouragement from the government is that that should all be pre-booked. Ideally, you should be encouraging people to make reservations in advance, and then you have that data for them. All they're looking for is name and a contact number that could be used by the government's contact tracing service as part of track and trace. But you will just need to make sure that if somebody is walking in and hasn't got a reservation, that you are asking for that information, or you're capturing it in another form. That might be Wi-Fi usage. It might be simply asking them for their name and a contact number, or asking for an email address. So that was the big thing that was not flagged in advance, that was only announced yesterday. We're working with the Department of Health to understand exactly what it is they're looking for and how we can help them in the government's efforts to control the virus. And the incentive for doing so is that clearly there is a risk of reopening hospitality. We are suddenly allowing more people to do more things. We therefore want to be a sensible, pragmatic, responsible industry that plays its part in keeping the virus under control and doing what we can to help the government in introducing the track and trace systems, which will be so important to managing further second spikes, local infection upticks, and avoiding a mass closure event again. That's probably a good point for me to pause and see if there are any questions and any particular issues you want to pick up over and above that reopening guidance.
Thanks, Kate. Lots and lots of questions. I think there's a huge number of questions around weddings, numbers of weddings, and you kind of intimated that's not clear. Could I also, quite a few people have said, do funerals count within those numbers? So could you maybe just talk about numbers again and timelines of getting real clarity on that?
Okay, well, weddings, they did say up to 30 people. Now that obviously includes bride, groom, the person conducting the ceremony, and the 2 witnesses. So you are limited in terms of number of guests. I am checking and trying to get that clarified within the week about, does that 30 mean that we can accommodate them in a reception event as well? Certainly it reads that way in the guidance that I've seen published, but it is slightly confused. It does talk about no more than 30 at an event. I would assume that that also extends to funerals. And again, we need to ask the question about catering, or whether that is just talking about church services. It was both a bit about weddings and funerals was contained in the element about being able to go back to worship in a designated venue, rather than it necessarily being in a hotel. So I think it's a relatively straightforward understanding. If you're licensed to conduct weddings, you can conduct the ceremony there. We just need to therefore make sure we can have the reception there as well. We are also, while I'm on the subject of weddings, we are expecting an emergency planning bill coming through later this week to look at deregulating outside areas, particularly helpful for hotels who perhaps haven't got planning permission or licensing permission for eating and drinking out in their gardens, that they would be able to use their outside space to accommodate people, not just in the terraces that you've already got that, but perhaps more broadly if you wanted to make use of it. They are also looking at deregulating the length of time you are allowed to have a temporary structure up without having to get planning permission. So currently you can only have a gazebo or a marquee up for 28 days without having planning permission. They are looking at extending that to 56 days or perhaps longer. So again, you can make better use of outside spaces. There is talk within that of allowing people who are currently licensed for weddings indoors to be able to conduct ceremonies outdoors, because there is a ban on weddings being conducted outdoors at the moment, which might then open up how many more guests you could have if you were in an outdoor setting. So I will seek to clarify that. We're hoping we'll get clarification by the end of the week. And I'm not sure, I've forgotten now what the other question was about weddings and funerals.
No, the numbers is I think the key issue, and the art of the possible in terms of indoor, and if that's breaking more than 2 family
You are allowed to break more than 2 families, because clearly if you're allowed up to 30, you are going to have more than 2 families. I think the thing that's not clear yet is it up to 30 only in the church or the venue for the ceremony, or is it up to 30 at a reception as well, and are we allowed to cater for that? My reading of the guidance is that yes, we are, but I don't want to give anybody a false hope that we can do that from the 4th of July until we've got absolute clarification. So I'm seeking that as a matter of urgency.
Thanks, Kate. There's quite a few questions around both gyms and pools, saying if we as the hotel industry don't allow access to changing rooms, can
no,
so
nice try.
I can see Kate going like that, but that doesn't pick up on the on the sound monitor.
No, no, not at the moment. I think we need to work through that with the government and try and get a rapid resolution. Clearly, they don't want to have any illogicality whereby you're allowed to do something in a hotel, but you can't do it in your normal gym. So they're wanting to make sure that they've got the controls in place. We are talking to government about potentially, could we bring forward the use of outdoor pools and potentially allowing the use of pools and facilities in hotels where you're not using communal changing. Now, clearly that limits the number of people that you can have accessing, and it would certainly restrict you to outside members. And I think that's the bit that we need to work through. I'm hopeful that we will get those areas open before July is out. I just can't get them open by the 4th of July.
And Boris was very clear on his wording yesterday. He talked about indoor pools. So just the rules are the same for outdoor pools as they are for indoor pools. There's no way around that.
At the moment, it's pools and communal changing. Now, that does allow us a little degree of wriggle room, but I don't think they're going to do that and make an announcement about that straight away. But I think that you could see how you could cascade that out. So it's top of my list to try and make sure that we can get all of your facilities, or if we can't get the gyms and we can't get the beauty treatments open, that we can get outdoor pools, indoor pools, and sort of spas where you're not having communal changing open as soon as we can, ideally before the start of the school holidays, because I appreciate it's going to impact massively on a lot of people's leisure bookings.
Yeah. Okay, there's quite a few questions sitting around GDPR and data, so I'm going to merge them together. One, has GDPR changed at all? Two, is there any onus on some of the OTAs who effectively don't give you the customer details? And three, one about OCI. I might come back to that. I need to, whoever asked that question, I need to find out what they mean. But could you just expand on the GDPR, please?
Yes, this is one of the areas that government will have to provide some clarity. They are allowed, where it's a public interest, all of us are allowed to effectively breach GDPR or move away from the strict controls of data on GDPR, where there is an overriding public interest test. And so all of the data that currently has been used when you're talking about care homes, when you're talking about care services, hospitals, etc., the Information Commissioner has given an overarching exemption from GDPR controls for the purposes of COVID-19. The government is going to work through that to provide a specific set of criteria and cover for the hospitality industry, where they would like us to encourage the sharing of customer data, so that if we're looking at historic data, or if we're looking at data that we haven't managed to get an updated permission slip from people, that we can share that on request. Again, I'm going to work with them to try and find out whether we need to include that in any exemptions when we ask people to tick boxes when they're making bookings or when they're making reservations or when they come to the hotel and check in, whether we need a general disclaimer about that in terms of sharing information. But I'll have to come back to you on that once we've had conversations with the Secretary of States.
There's quite a few questions about masks. So you said that encouragement for guests to wear masks, and there's a couple of questions around clarity of, is it compulsory for staff to wear masks?
Okay, yes, the encouragement is encourage guests to wear masks in communal corridors. So it's not a general blanket requirement, and clearly that is their personal responsibility, and you are not under any obligation if anybody refuses to do it. And there are also exemptions from people for even areas where mask wearing is mandated, like public transport. People are exempt if they have breathing difficulties or a medical reason why they can't wear a mask. So it's not a problem if people are wandering around your hotel and they don't wear masks. You are just suggested that you remind them in your check-in details, in any briefing you send them, that would be a sort of an encouragement to do. In terms of staff, there's no mandatory obligation for staff to wear masks. You are free to look at whether you feel it would be helpful for them to do so, and it remains one of the measures of infection control that you are able to use, particularly in kitchens, in back of house areas where they are enclosed, that they can't keep 1 meter social distancing, and there's poor ventilation. So it remains your decision as to whether you would provide face coverings in that situation. And as I say, the reference is to face coverings, not to face masks. It remains bottom of the list of control measures as far as PHE is concerned, and there's a general disclaimer at the front of the guidance when it comes to face coverings to say that unless your job normally requires you to use PPE, you don't need to do so. The exception to that would be if you have a case or a suspected case of COVID-19 in a guest, and then you need to get people to clean the room. That's the time that you would provide housekeeping with masks and gloves.
Okay, there's quite a few questions around the policing of this. If someone has a table of 8 booked, where does the responsibility lie for the hotelier, the restaurateur, to actually confirm that they are 2 households, not 8 individual friends getting together?
Well, bear in mind that there is the other set that you are allowed to be 6 people from 6 individuals from different households. And so there are going to be blurring of the lines. The responsibility is primarily on the person who's making the booking. The individual is supposed to make sure that they are keeping their own social distancing, keeping within their own safe bubble. I think the only time that you would raise a question as an operator is if you suddenly had a restaurant book a booking for, a table of 20, where it's clearly beyond the realms of possibility that they are 2 households, and then you would just need to make a check and just see who it is who's making that booking and ask the question. There is no law here behind this. This is just guidance about what you would be doing to minimize your risk. So I would advise that you have that as a part of your risk assessment protocol, that your team members who are taking bookings in the restaurant are asking those questions. And clearly, if you did have family groups, from different households, we've been talking about being able to get together with all of my extended family in a hotel. You would still be able to seat 2 groups of 4 on one table and 2 groups of 4 socially distanced on another table. So you could still do it. It's not prohibited from taking a booking for a big party. You just need to manage the social distancing within the restaurant.
And is there any guidance? There's quite a few people who have already or are contemplating doing temperatures, checking temperatures for either staff or guests. Is there any guidance around that?
No, again, that is just your own personal choice as to whether you would like to do that. I know that there are quite a few operators, particularly in the attraction space, some of the larger hotels and in chains in London in particular, who are looking at doing temperature checks, particularly if they would normally have a large number of inbound visitors. and a number of people are looking at reverting back to the questionnaires that people had about confirming people have not travelled to certain countries, but to use that as and when required when we get the lifting in quarantine. Again, that's for you to determine how comfortable you feel in managing your risks.
A few questions around, as a couple of golf operators listening, in a golf or country club environment, which may include a bar or restaurant, how many people can congregate inside and outside, as they may know each other but aren't from the same household?
If they're sitting together in the restaurant or the bar, inside or outside, it really should be just 6 people from different households currently. But again, I go back to the fact that that is for them to police, not necessarily you. If you have got that golf facility, your golf course can be opened. You can't have and the golf shop can be, you can't have communal changing facilities open. So provided people are coming and using the golf club, and they're not necessarily then going to use a communal facility, they are fine. They can also come into the restaurant, they can come into the bar.
Fantastic. Kate, reading question here, can you outline the mitigations to reduce a table from 2 metre distance to 1 metre distance?
Okay, so I think you would still need to make sure you've got space between the tables. So the distance that's referred to, when it was 2 metres, it was face-to-face contact at 2 metres, not necessarily for those sitting on the same table. So it is the gaps between tables that you're needing to look at. So mitigation measures principally when it's around seating, but also in the kitchen, if you're at 1 metre. Or in the bar, side-by-side working, back-to-back working, that also works for reception. That would allow you to be at 1 metre distance. Hygiene, hand sanitizer, ventilation, all of those things that you would just have running through the premises as a matter of good course, making sure you're frequently cleaning common touch areas if there are touch points that different people are touching, and also making sure that you are keeping the distance, particularly on the side-by-side and the access points around the table. So I think it's just looking at what would be a comfortable distance in a table, and when you're accommodating parties.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions about if there's a confirmed case of COVID on the property. I've seen that's become a riddle reportable item. Is there any specific guidance around that anywhere that people can go to look up that guidance?
We're expecting the guidance to be updated about what do you do if you have a case, because the current guidance is written just in terms of somebody who is currently in quarantine in a hotel. So we're expecting the updated guidance on that to come out later today, and we'll publish it when we do our guidance. So as far as I understand it, that if they can go home in their own transport to isolate themselves at home, they should do so. You then have particularly stringent cleaning criteria that you should use in the room where they've vacated, which includes bagging all the waste, all the laundry, and storing it somewhere for 72 hours before it goes then mixed into the laundry. 72 hours being the time frame during which the virus deteriorates on soft furnishings, and so then you can wash it safely with everything else without contaminating. That's clearly if you've got both a confirmed case or a suspected case. So if you have a guest who starts symptoms, cough, fever, they should be encouraged to go home if they can do so without being on public transport. If they can't go home, there is a question mark over whether they should self-isolate in the hotel, which is currently how it's drafted under the current quarantine rules, but we're waiting to see whether that's amended. You would only need to take more stringent steps if you have a positive test that comes back within 48 hours.
Thanks, Kate. I'm sure there's the big question everybody's been asking all the time, 14-day quarantine you've just mentioned. Yes, the
measures are coming up for review on 29th of June. So that's when it goes before Parliament. Unless there are substantial changes to that quarantine policy, including air bridges, I suspect that the policy will be voted down if it's put to a vote by MPs, because a lot of people don't like it at all. And so I think you'll see substantial changes. It's possible it could be scrapped altogether, or it's possible it could be substantially amended with the air bridges policy in place. So we just wait to see.
And VAT?
It's under consideration by the Chancellor. We know that they are looking at it. So the Chancellor is going to do a fiscal statement on the 8th of July, which looks at economic recovery, stimulating demand. And we know VAT is one of the things that's been looked at, along with some of the other taxes and support measures for hospitality. And that's where we are lobbying really quite hard to get some additional support to try and get us through what will be a suppressed recovery, and particularly for those who've got a lot of inbound tourism.
How hopeful are you on that?
Well, ordinarily, I wouldn't be very hopeful at all, because it's such a big number. But in the context of saying you're going to loan people £330 billion, saying it's going to cost £7 billion for a tourism VAT cut is sort of chump change, really. So I think I'm more confident than I have ever been. I'd never say that I'm 100% confident, because it's not something that ministers like to do. But I think if you were going to do it, this is the time that you would do a temporary cut. I think it will be temporary, however.
Could you just re-clarify? I'm going to read a question here. There still seems to be some confusion around numbers here. This question says, it seems that yesterday Boris said that maximum 2 family groups indoors, but 6 people who may come from different family groups. You seem to have contradicted that with the number of people that are allowed indoors. Could you please clarify?
I don't think I have contradicted it. Two family groups can meet indoors or outdoors. 6 people from different households can meet indoors or outdoors. There is up to 30 is the maximum for an event at the moment, but I presume that is linked to weddings and funerals. But I don't think I contradicted any further. Maybe I confused you when I talked about the different ways you could accommodate bookings. But you might have 2 family groups could be 10 to 12 people. And clearly, if you have multiple families who decide to meet together, as long as you are not seating them in 20 people, you could split up those groups in socially distanced tables so that they were no more than 2 family groups at a table. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. We'll see if there's any more questions coming through on that. Okay, there's a little bit about is there any guidance on timelines around if you do have a case of COVID and how long you should leave rooms or areas where someone who's had COVID has been?
No, there's no specified minimum time requirements. Again, that would be left to you to use your discretion, or to see how you see what you think. You may decide that it would be sensible if you had somebody who was displaying COVID symptoms and isolated themselves in their room. So if a guest shows COVID symptoms, they are supposed to go straight to their room, phone for a doctor and arrange a test. You may then choose, knowing that, to provide a longer rest period between that room to allow for more thorough cleaning, more thorough deep cleaning of the soft furnishings, to make sure that the virus had deteriorated. But there isn't a specified minimum period of time, and clearly there is a high likelihood that you would get people coming into the hotel who you only find out afterwards have tested positive for COVID, and you won't be able to manage that process. So I think it is back to doing your risk assessment, putting in place really stringent cleaning protocols, and they are there and detailed in our guidance and in the government guidance. There are 2 sets. There's one for normal and there's one for cleaning in a non-clinical environment. If you are wanting to go that extra mile and you are wanting to sort of talk to your customers about how much more in depth you have done, you may want to take a look at that. You will then need to factor in how much longer it will take your teams, your housekeeping teams, to clean those rooms, rotate those rooms, whatever. You may need to amend your check-in times accordingly, because it will require a deeper clean. The virus degrades really quite quickly on most surfaces, and that's what we're really talking about. So the priority needs to be on the common touch points. So door handles, light switches, taps, those are the areas that are the real top area of concern. And you should, if you're really being belt and braces, you don't need to use any special cleaning materials, but you need something that's antibacterial on those surfaces if you're wanting to do that. Kettles, teacups, those kind of areas, the common touches, those are the ones you should be looking at. It degrades far more quickly in well-ventilated, well-lit rooms. So you need to make sure the doors and windows are kept open at all times while it's being cleaned, as much as possible when somebody vacates. But there isn't any minimum.
So that there's lots of questions which it sound that are coming through now about, can we open lounges, turnaround times of bedrooms? But you're saying in those two documents that there's all the information. How can people access those two documents?
So we're going to send them out to all our members later today. We're just getting some final clearance from Public Health England about our industry protocols to make sure that they are completely happy with them. We'll write to all of our members. We'll write to all of those who signed up to the COVID-19 daily update later this evening. And then we will make it freely available on our website.
I think the second to last question is around meetings, and just for clarity, the guidance, hotels can host meetings for up to 30 people is the interpretation.
That's my interpretation. You are allowed to have small scale meetings if people book it, both internal meetings, but also hosting some external meetings. But you must make sure that the meeting room is socially distanced, and you must make sure that it's not a mass gathering. I'm checking as to whether that reference in the guidance that says a maximum of 30 people applies to meetings, but I think that's what it does.
I'm sorry, you're becoming a cleaning and hygiene expert. Any views on any views on UV and ozone cleaners?
They can be additionally helpful. I don't think that they are more helpful necessarily than good old-fashioned soap and water. I mean, you are back to basics, that the single most effective thing that you can use to clean surfaces is bleach or an antibacterial spray. It's the same as hand washing. It's soap and water. Obviously, the UV and the ozone cleaners help with your soft furnishings, where it's really not clear how quickly the virus degrades. But I think, opening the doors and windows dilutes the virus spread. So making sure when you are cleaning those rooms, doors and windows are well ventilated. I should just say we are doing a series of webinars as well, which are available not just to members, but to anybody in the industry who logs on. We've got a series of them this week, and we'll probably have them next week as well, about getting ready for reopening. We did have our EHO and food standards expert yesterday. All of them are recorded. They're on our website. You can go to our coronavirus website page, which has all the guidance, both official and our industry protocols. It has all of the information that we've got from government. It has all of our series of webinars that we've been doing. So please make sure that you've got that as well. So, I think, I've just seen one of the questions that come through. There isn't likely to be additional EHO guidance over and above this. So the Bible that we've got is the risk assessment tool that UKHospitality has developed, and the menu of options that we've given operators. And all you will need to do is to demonstrate and push back to the EHO is, here is my risk assessment. These are the steps I've taken. But all of it now is guidance. There's not a legislative backing that can trip you up. So
final question, Kate. So for operators planning to open, what what would one bit of advice that you would give them?
I think do your risk assessment thoroughly. Talk to your teams about it, because they have often good ideas, or they may have areas where they have concerns about how they are operating and what they are expected to do, which you can build into your risk assessment. And go back to what the Prime Minister said yesterday, is we're moving away from mandation and enforcement. We're moving towards a common sense approach. So use your common sense when you're working it through. And the one thing we haven't talked about, which would be remiss of me not to mention, buffet breakfasts, self-service. I think you are not going to be able to do that. If I was doing a risk assessment, I would not be wanting to do self-service where multiple guests are touching the same spoons. So I think breakfast is the one thing to rethink quite carefully, where you've got self-service items. However, that needs to be balanced against the suggestion in the guidance that you minimize the touch points between plate or cutlery, staff touching it, customers touching it. So providing you can manage those two slight push and pull, you will still have opportunities to lay out things that people can work through, and you will also be able to have sort of carvery style counters that your chefs can serve behind if you wanted to do that buffet. Better to do it as a service rather than the customer serving themselves.
Kate, thank you so much. As always, hugely informative. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you for everything you're doing for the industry.
No problem at all. Thank you.